The metal floor of Station Carvex shook with another roar. Deep in the lower levels, something massive was suffering, and everyone on the station could feel it. Maya Chen pressed her back against the cold wall of the maintenance tunnel, her hands trembling slightly. She had been working on the station for 3 months now, always keeping to herself, always staying in the shadows where no one would notice her. That was how she preferred it. Silent, invisible, safe. But tonight, something pulled her toward the forbidden lower decks. She moved carefully through the narrow service tunnels, her small frame easily sliding through spaces, meant only for repair drones. The deeper she went, the more the air seemed to vibrate with an unseen force. It pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. Most people would have turned back by now. Most people would have run. Maya kept going. 3 days ago, the entire station had watched as Thuxalor the War Dragon collapsed in the Grand Arena. The fight had been broadcast across 12 systems. Millions watched as the undefeated champion, the legend who had won over 1,000 battles, suddenly fell to his knees mid-combat. His opponent had frozen, uncertain whether to strike or retreat. Then Thuxalor screamed. It was not a roar of rage or challenge. It was pure agony. The arena floor had cracked beneath him as his body convulsed. His massive wings, each one spanning 20 meters, had flailed wildly. The telepathic wave that burst from him killed 3 spectators in the front row instantly. 50 more collapsed with bleeding eyes and ears. The arena had to be evacuated. Since then, no one could get near him. The station's best healers tried first. Commander Vorath, a Thanari medical specialist known across the Confederation, approached with a full team. They made it within 30 meters before the pressure became unbearable. One healer's bones started cracking from the telepathic force. They retreated. Next came the warriors. If they could not heal him, perhaps they could subdue him long enough for treatment. General Cross, a Valamian war chief with 4 centuries of combat experience, led the attempt. His armor was rated to withstand plasma fire and kinetic strikes. It crumpled like paper when he crossed the 20-meter threshold. His team dragged him out barely alive. Then they sent in the battle priests of Zenthor, beings who trained their entire lives to resist mental attacks. They chanted their protective mantras and advanced slowly. At 15 meters, the youngest priest started screaming and clawing at his own face. At 10 meters, the head priest's nose began bleeding. They retreated, reporting that the war dragon's mind was not attacking them. It was simply too broken, too agonized to control its own power. Being near the Xalar was like standing in the heart of a psychic storm. The station commander made the decision to contain him. They used gravity locks and force fields to seal him in the deepest cargo hold, a place originally designed to store volatile materials. The walls were reinforced. Guards were posted outside, though they had to stay at least 50 meters away to avoid the psychic pressure. Maya reached a ventilation grate that overlooked the cargo hold. She pressed her face to the cool metal bars and looked down. The space below was enormous, designed to hold 3 massive cargo ships. Now, it held only one creature, though that creature was large enough to fill half the hold. The Xalor was coiled in the center, his serpentine body wrapped around itself. His scales, which should have gleamed like polished obsidian, were dull and cracked. His wings, usually held proud and high, dragged on the floor. But what caught Maya's attention were the wounds. Along his spine, where his neck met his shoulders, there were marks that looked like burns. They glowed faintly with a sickly green light, and thick black fluid oozed from them. The fluid dripped onto the metal floor and ate through it like acid. Wherever Thuxalor shifted, his wounds left smoking holes in the deck. Maya had seen many things in her 19 years. She had watched her colony ship tear apart in space. She had floated in an escape pod for 6 days, surrounded by the bodies of her family. Before rescue came, she had lived with nightmares every night since then, waking up screaming in the darkness of her tiny quarters. She knew what suffering looked like. Thuxalor raised his massive head suddenly, and Maya froze. His eyes were golden, slit like a cat's, and ancient. They swept across the cargo hold, searching. For a moment, she thought he might have sensed her presence. Then, his head dropped again, too heavy to hold up. A hiss of pain escaped him, and the sound made Maya's chest ache. She stayed there for an hour, just watching. When her shift alarm beeped softly on her wrist, she finally pulled away and made her way back through the tunnels. The next morning, Maya sat in the crowded cafeteria, her meal tray untouched. Around her, station workers talked loudly about the war dragon problem. "They're going to put him down," said Renko, a Corvin technician. "Commander's orders. Can't risk keeping him alive if no one can treat him." "It's a waste," another worker replied. "Do you know how much a war dragon is worth? The Carthene species hasn't produced a new one in 50 years. Worth doesn't matter if he kills half the station before they can figure out what's wrong with him." Maya listened silently. She never spoke in the cafeteria. She never spoke anywhere. Really. Not since the colony ship. The station workers knew her as the quiet human girl who cleaned air filters and fixed broken panels. They left her alone, which was exactly what she wanted. But now, listening to them discuss the Salar's execution, something stirred in her chest. It was a feeling she had buried deep after the colony ship disaster. A feeling she thought had died with her family. It was the feeling of wanting to do something. That evening, she did not go back to her quarters after her shift ended. Instead, she went to the station's medical supply room. She had clearance maintenance workers needed basic medical supplies in case of injuries during repairs. She gathered bandages, antiseptic solutions, clean water, and a few other items. Then she returned to the maintenance tunnels. The journey to the cargo hold took 20 minutes. The closer she got, the stronger the pressure became. It felt like invisible hands pushing against her skull, trying to squeeze her brain. Her vision started to blur at the edges. Most people would experience this as overwhelming terror or physical pain. Maya felt it differently. Her mind, locked in its silent state for 5 years, processed the telepathic pressure like white noise. It was uncomfortable, but it did not frighten her. Perhaps because her own internal voice had been quiet for so long, the chaos in the Xalar's mind did not overwhelm her the way it did others. She reached the grate again and looked down. The Xalar was in the same position, coiled and suffering. The wounds on his spine looked worse now. The black fluid had pooled around him, eating through the floor and creating a moat of corroded metal. Maya took a deep breath. Then she did something incredibly stupid. She climbed down. The climb down to the cargo hold floor was harder than Maya expected. The maintenance ladder was old and slippery, and her hands shook as she descended. Halfway down, the telepathic pressure hit her like a physical wall. Her nose started bleeding, warm drops falling onto her work uniform. She kept climbing. When her feet finally touched the metal floor, Maya had to stop and lean against the wall. Her head pounded. Her ears rang. Every instinct screamed at her to climb back up and run. But she didn't. She pulled her small backpack around and checked the supplies inside. Everything was still secure. The Xalar was 50 meters away across the massive cargo hold. That should have been safe distance according to the reports. The battle priests had only made it to 10 meters. Maya didn't plan to get that close. Not today. She walked slowly across the floor, careful to avoid the pools of acidic fluid that had dripped from the war dragon's wounds. Each step felt like walking through thick mud. The pressure increased with every meter. At 30 meters, her vision started to tunnel. At 25 meters, she tasted copper in her mouth. At 20 meters, the Xalar's head snapped up. His golden eyes locked onto her immediately. The pressure around Maya increased so suddenly that she fell to her knees. It felt like a giant hand pressing down on her entire body. She gasped for air but kept her eyes on the dragon. The Xalar unfurled slightly, his massive form rising. Even injured and weak, he was terrifying. His head alone was larger than Maya's entire body. His teeth, each one as long as her forearm, showed as his lips pulled back in a snarl. A deep growl rumbled from his chest, shaking the floor beneath her. Maya didn't run. She couldn't, her legs wouldn't work. But even if they could, she realized she wouldn't have run anyway. She slowly reached into her backpack and pulled out a canteen of water and a small bowl. Her hands shook as she poured water into the bowl. The growl grew louder. The Xalar's tail lashed once, smashing into the far wall. and leaving a dent in the reinforced metal. He was warning her, threatening her, telling her to leave. Maya set the bowl down on the floor in front of her. Then, moving very slowly, she slid it across the metal surface toward the dragon. It skidded to a stop about 10 meters from his coiled body. She didn't try to get closer. She just left it there. Then she did something that probably saved her life. She turned her back to him. She walked to the far wall of the cargo hold, a full 40 meters from the tsaler, and sat down with her back against it. She pulled out her notebook, a battered thing she carried everywhere, and a pencil. She opened to a blank page and started drawing. Behind her, the tsaler's growl slowly faded. She could feel his eyes on her back, confused and suspicious. No one had ever turned their back on a war dragon. It was unthinkable. Warriors faced them head-on. Healers approached with caution. Even his enemies met his gaze before fighting. This small human just sat with her back to him and drew pictures. Maya sketched from memory. She drew the stars as they looked from her colony ship before it died. She drew the garden dome where her mother grew vegetables. She drew her little brother's face, trying to remember exactly how his smile looked. Her hand moved across the paper while tears ran silently down her face. Hours passed. The lights in the cargo hold ran through their automatic cycle, dimming to simulate night. Maya's hand cramped, but she kept drawing. Behind her, she heard movement. The scrape of scales on metal. Heavy breathing. Then, silence. When she finally turned around, the bowl was empty. The Zalor had retreated back to his coiled position, but his eyes were still open, still watching her. The pressure in the room had decreased slightly, not much, but enough that Maya's headache eased from crushing to merely painful. She stood slowly, every muscle stiff from sitting so long. She walked to the bowl, picked it up, and refilled it with water. This time, she left it a little closer, maybe 12 meters from him. She also left a piece of dried meat from her ration pack. It was probably not what war dragons normally ate, but it was all she had. Then she returned to her spot on the wall and sat back down. Before she left that night, climbing back up the ladder as the morning shift change alarm sounded through the station, she looked back one more time. The Xalar was watching her. His expression was unreadable, but he wasn't growling anymore. Maya returned the next night, and the night after that. Each time, she brought water and whatever food she could spare. Each time, she sat in the same spot against the far wall. Each time, she drew in her notebook or simply sat in silence. And each time, the bowl was empty when she looked again. On the fourth night, she brought a cleaning kit, industrial solvents used for removing hazardous materials. The acidic fluid around the Xalor was spreading, eating through more of the floor each day. If it wasn't cleaned, it would eventually breach the hull. Maya approached the edge of the corroded area, staying well outside the danger zone. She got down on her hands and knees and began scrubbing. The work was hard, and the fumes were terrible, but she worked steadily, clearing away the damaged sections and neutralizing the acid. The Xalar watched her the entire time. His tail twitched occasionally, but he made no move to stop her. When she finished an hour later, she had cleared a 3-meter section. It wasn't much compared to the total damage, but it was a start. On the fifth night, something changed. Maya climbed down the ladder as usual, carrying her supplies. But when she reached the floor, she found Xalar already watching her, his head raised and alert. The pressure in the room was different, still present, but less chaotic, more controlled. She set down her backpack and pulled out the water and food. But before she could start her usual routine, she heard a sound that made her freeze. It was inside her head, not words, exactly. More like feelings and impressions. Confusion. Curiosity. And underneath it all, a question. Why? Maya's hand went to her chest, surprised. She had felt telepathic touches before. Many species on the station communicated partially through mental links. But this was different. This was powerful and ancient, and carried the weight of 1,000 battles. She slowly pulled out her notebook. She wrote carefully, in large, clear letters. Because I know what it feels like when everything hurts and nobody understands. She held up the notebook, showing him the words. The Xalar stared at the page for a long moment. Then his head lowered slightly, and the pressure in the room decreased another notch. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was acknowledgement. Maya sat down in her usual spot and began to hum. Not words she still couldn't speak, but a melody her mother used to sing. An old earth lullaby about stars and safety and home. Her voice was rusty from years of silence, and the tune was shaky, but she hummed it anyway. In the darkness of the cargo hold, the war dragon's breathing slowly steadied. For the first time since his collapse in the arena, the Xalar closed his eyes and rested without screaming. On the 6th night, Maya made a decision that would change everything. She was going to try to treat his wounds. Maya spent her entire day shift researching war dragons in the station's database. The information was limited. The Carthene species was ancient and secretive. Most of what existed were battle records and legends, but she found enough to understand the basics. War dragons bonded with warriors telepathically. The bond was permanent, marked by glowing symbols that appeared on the dragon's scales. When a bonded warrior died in battle, the dragon mourned but eventually healed. The bond faded naturally over time, but severing a bond while both parties still lived was different. It was considered the ultimate betrayal. The mental connection didn't fade, it tore, leaving wounds that never healed properly. Both the dragon and the warrior suffered. Though dragons bore the worst of it, Maya found a report buried deep in the files. The Xalar's last bonded warrior was Commander Zethrain, a Valamian war chief. They had fought together for 12 years, winning every battle. Then came the siege of Korath Prime. During the battle, Zethrain ordered a retreat to save himself, abandoning the Xalar in the middle of enemy fire. When the Xalar called for help through their bond, Zethrain severed it. The dragon had survived the battle alone. But the severed bond left Mark's psychic wounds that manifested as physical injuries on his spine. No medicine could heal them, because they weren't truly physical. They were mental scars made visible. That evening, Maya packed her medical supplies differently. She included everything she had learned might help: cooling gels for burns, clean bandages, antiseptic solutions, and pain medication. She also brought something else, a small music player with her mother's favorite songs saved on it. The climb down to the cargo hold felt longer than usual. Maya's heart pounded as her feet hit the floor. Tonight would be different. Tonight she would try something no trained healer had been able to do. The Xalar was awake, watching her descent. Over the past week, he had started anticipating her arrival. The pressure in the room was lower now when she first entered, as if he deliberately controlled it for her. Maya walked to her usual spot but didn't sit down. Instead, she placed her backpack on the floor and began unpacking supplies. She laid them out carefully where the Xalar could see bandages, bottles, medical tools. Then she sat down and waited. She pulled out her notebook and wrote, "Your wounds hurt because they're not just on your body. They're in your mind too. I can't fix that. But maybe I can help with the pain." She held up the notebook. The Xalar's golden eyes tracked the words. A feeling brushed against her mind, doubt, mixed with curiosity. Maya set the notebook down and simply waited. She had learned patience over the past week. The Xalar needed to make his own choices. She wouldn't force anything. 10 minutes passed. 20. Then, slowly, the massive dragon began to move. His coiled body unfurled slightly, and he shifted position. The movement revealed the wounds on his spine more clearly. They looked worse up close, angry and festering, the flesh around them blackened and cracked. Maya's breath caught. Up close, the damage was horrifying. How was he even still alive with injuries like that? The Xalar's head lowered until it rested on the floor, still 15 meters away from her. But his neck stretched out, and his body uncurled more. It was an invitation. Or maybe a test. Maya stood slowly. She picked up her medical kit and walked forward. At 12 meters, the pressure increased. Her nose started bleeding again. At 10 meters, her hands shook. At 8 meters, her vision blurred at the edges. At 5 meters, she had to stop and breathe deeply. The telepathic force was overwhelming. Images flashed through her mind, not her memories, but his. Battles. Blood. The moment when Zethrain's voice disappeared from his mind, leaving only screaming silence. Maya understood that silence. She lived in it every day. She took 3 more steps and knelt beside the Salar's massive shoulder. This close, each of his scales was the size of her hand. His breathing made the air around her vibrate. One movement from him could crush her instantly. Her hands trembled as she opened the medical kit. She pulled out a bottle of cleaning solution and soaked a cloth in it. Then, moving very slowly, she reached out and touched the edge of one wound. The Salar's entire body went rigid. A growl rumbled deep in his chest. The pressure spiked so hard that Maya gasped, blood running from her nose and the corner of one eye. But she didn't pull away. She kept her hands steady and continued cleaning the wound's edge gently. "I know it hurts." She whispered the first words she had spoken aloud in 5 years. Her voice was hoarse and broken. "I know. I know." The growl faded slightly. The Xalar's mind pressed against hers. Testing. Questioning. She let him in. She had no mental shields. No training in telepathy. Her mind was open like a book. He saw everything. Her colony ship tearing apart. Her parents dying. Her little brother's hand going cold in hers. The 6 days, floating in space surrounded by death. The nightmares. The silence that came after, when words stopped making sense, and the world became too loud, and too bright, and too painful. He saw that she understood betrayal. She understood abandonment. She understood wounds that no doctor could heal. Something shifted in the telepathic pressure. It didn't disappear, but it changed, became less like a storm, and more like a presence. Heavy, but not crushing. Maya continued working. She cleaned the first wound as thoroughly as she could, removing the dead tissue around the edges. The black fluid that oozed out burned her fingers even through gloves, but she ignored the pain. She applied cooling gel and wrapped the area in special bandages, designed for chemical burns. It took 2 hours to treat the first wound. By the time she finished, Maya was exhausted and shaking. Her hands were burned despite the gloves. Her head pounded from the constant telepathic pressure, but the wound looked cleaner. The black fluid had stopped flowing, at least temporarily. The Salar hadn't moved the entire time. His breathing had remained steady, controlled. When Maya finally sat back, her hand still resting lightly on his scales, she felt something through their connection, gratitude mixed with confusion. She pulled out her notebook with her burned hands and wrote, "I'll come back tomorrow. We'll treat the next one." That night, when Maya climbed back up the ladder, the station's night shift was starting. She made her way to her quarters, treated her burned hands, and collapsed on her bunk. She was asleep in seconds. She didn't hear the alarm that went off in the command center. She didn't know that the sensors in the cargo hold had registered something impossible for the first time in 2 weeks. The Salar's vital signs had stabilized. His heart rate was steady. His breathing was normal. The psychic readings had dropped to half their previous levels. Commander Vorath stared at the monitors in disbelief. "What happened down there?" The security officer pulled up the cargo hold's camera feed. The angle was bad, most of the hold was a blind spot. But they could just make out a small figure climbing up the maintenance ladder. "Sir," the officer said slowly, "I think that's Maya Chen, the maintenance worker." What was she doing in the restricted area? The officer zoomed in on the timestamp. "She's been going down there every night for a week." Commander Vorath's expression shifted from confusion to shock. "Get me everything we know about that human." Now, Maya woke to pounding on her door. She sat up groggily, her burned hands throbbing. The clock on her wall showed 0600 hours, barely 4 hours since she had fallen asleep. The pounding continued. "Maya Chen. Open the door. This is Commander Vorath." Her stomach dropped. She stumbled to the door and pressed the release button. It slid open to reveal Commander Vorath, 2 security officers, and a tall insectoid being she recognized as Dr. Vexana, the station's chief xenopsychologist. "You've been entering restricted areas," Vorath said without preamble, his 4 eyes fixed on her sternly. "The cargo hold where we're keeping the war dragon. Do you understand how dangerous that is?" Maya's hands moved instinctively to sign, but she stopped. Most species on the station didn't know human sign language. She reached for the datapad she kept by her door and typed, "Yes, I understand." "Then why did you do it?" Vorath demanded. Maya typed slowly. "Because he was suffering. Because everyone gave up on him." Dr. Vexana stepped forward, her multifaceted eyes gleaming with interest. The sensors registered significant changes in Thaler's condition last night. His vital signs stabilized for the first time since his collapse. "What did you do?" Maya held up her bandaged hands. "You touched him?" Vorath's voice rose. "You got within 5 meters of an injured war dragon? Do you have any idea?" "Let her explain." Dr. Vexana interrupted. She looked at Maya with something like fascination. "Please. What happened down there?" What happened down there?" Maya typed for several minutes, explaining everything. The water and food. The sitting in silence. The gradual decrease in telepathic pressure. Finally, treating his wounds. When she finished, Vorath and Vexana exchanged glances. "This is impossible," Vorath said. "War dragons only tolerate touch from their bonded warriors. The telepathic pressure alone should have killed you at 5 meters. Vexana tilted her head thoughtfully. "Unless something about her is different. Tell me, Maya. Do you hear an internal voice? Thoughts in words inside your head?" Maya frowned and typed, "Not anymore. Not since the colony ship. Everything went quiet after that." "Fascinating," Vexana breathed. "Your selective mutism has restructured your neural patterns. Instead of verbal thought, you process through images and emotions. To a telepathic being, your mind would feel fundamentally different from most species." "Explain that in simple terms," Vorath said impatiently. "Most minds are loud, constant internal chatter. To the Xalar's wounded telepathic senses, that noise is painful. But Maya's mind is quiet. Organized differently. Being near her doesn't hurt him the way others do." Vexana leaned closer to Maya. "You said you felt his memories. That suggests a connection formed. A partial telepathic link." Maya's eyes widened. She typed quickly. "Is that bad?" "It shouldn't be possible at all," Vexana replied. "War dragons bond only with proven warriors of noble bloodlines. Humans aren't even on the list of compatible species. Yet somehow, you've formed a connection with him." Before anyone could say more, an alarm blared through the station. Red emergency lights flashed in the corridors. Vorath's communicator crackled to life. "Commander, we have multiple ships emerging from hyperspace at the system's edge. Krill raiders, at least 20 vessels. They're heading straight for us." Vorath's face went pale. "How long until they reach us?" 4 hours at their current speed. "What about the Confederation fleet?" 3 days out, minimum." The security officers looked at each other nervously. Everyone on the station knew what Krill raiders did. They attacked remote outposts, took everything valuable, and killed anyone who resisted. Station Carvex had minimal defenses. It was a civilian station, not a military base. Vorath was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Maya. "The war dragon. Can he fight?" Maya stared at him. She typed, "He's injured, weak. I know. But he's the only weapon we have that might make the Krill think twice." Vorath's expression was grim. "I'm not ordering you to do anything, but if there's any chance he could defend the station, we have 15,000 civilians here. Families. Children." Maya thought about the crowded cafeteria. The families she saw in the corridors. The children playing in the recreation areas. She thought about her own family. Dead in space because no one could save them. She typed, "I'll ask him, but it's his choice. Not mine. Not yours." They went down to the cargo hold together, Maya, Vorath, Vexana, and 4 security officers. The officers stayed at the entrance, refusing to get closer. Even Vorath stopped at 30 meters, his face strained from the pressure. Only Maya and Vexana approached further. The doctor had some telepathic resistance training and managed to reach 20 meters before stopping. Maya walked the rest of the way alone. The Solar was already awake, watching her approach. She could feel his confusion through their faint connection. Why was she here during the day? Why were others with her? She knelt beside him and pulled out her datapad. She typed out the situation, the Krill raiders, the evacuating civilians, the fact that the station couldn't defend itself. Then she added, "I'm not asking you to fight. You don't owe these people anything. But I wanted you to know what's happening." The Xalar's mind brushed against hers. She felt him considering, thinking. Then images flooded her mind, memories of battles, of protecting those weaker than himself, of what it meant to be Carthene. War dragons weren't just weapons, they were protectors. But mixed with those memories was pain, exhaustion, the knowledge that he was broken. Maya rested her hand on his scales. She didn't send words through their connection, she wasn't sure how. Instead, she sent a feeling, a memory of her own. Her mother, standing between Maya and danger during the colony ship's final moments, choosing to protect even when afraid. The Xalar rumbled deep in his chest. Then, slowly, he began to rise. His wounds reopened with the movement, black fluid seeping out. His legs shook from weakness. But he stood, unfurling his massive wings for the first time in weeks. They were torn and scarred, but still impressive. Maya looked up at him, this ancient, broken warrior who had every reason to stay down, and felt tears in her eyes. Through their connection, she felt his question. "Will you fly with me?" She had never flown before. She had no training, no armor, no weapons. She was a maintenance worker who cleaned air filters and fixed broken panels. But she typed anyway. "Yes." Vorath's voice echoed across the cargo hold. "This is insane. She's not a warrior. She can't bond with him." Dr. Vexana's response was quieter but firm. "Commander, I don't think we have a choice." "Look." Everyone watched as Maya climbed onto the Xalar's back, settling between his shoulder blades near the wounds she had bandaged. The moment she touched the spot where his old bond marks used to glow, something happened. Light erupted from the Xalar's scales. Not the traditional red of warrior bonds, but soft blue, the color of Earth's sky. The marks that appeared were different too. Spiral patterns, instead of angular symbols. Maya gasped as the connection between them suddenly strengthened, snapping into place like a door closing. The Xalar's thoughts became clear in her mind, and hers in his. Not words, but understanding. Perfect and complete. "Impossible," Vexana whispered. "A new type of bond. I've never seen anything like it." The Xalar turned his massive head to look at Maya. Through their bond, she felt his question clearly now. "Ready?" She gripped his scales tightly and thought back. Ready. No warrior could stand near the war dragon until a silent human girl reached out to his wounds. Part 5. When silence roars. The hangar bay doors opened slowly, revealing the black expanse of space. Maya clung to the Xalar's back, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had never been outside a ship or station without a spacesuit before. Fear flooded through her. Through their bond, the Xalar sent calm. His body generated a protective field that would keep her alive in the vacuum. She had to trust him. Trust. Something neither of them had been able to do for a long time. All non-essential personnel to evacuation ships. Commander Vorath's voice echoed through the station speakers. "Prepare for possible enemy engagement." Enemy. 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 Maya watched through the hangar entrance as civilian ships began launching, fleeing toward the outer system. Families packed into cargo vessels, children crying as parents rushed them aboard. It reminded her too much of her own last moments on the colony ship. She felt the Xalar's growl vibrate through his whole body. He felt her pain through their bond. And it became his pain too. The krill fleet appeared on the horizon, 20 ships, dark and angular, shaped like massive beetles. They moved in formation, predatory and confident. Station Carvex was an easy target. No military escort, no heavy weapons, just civilians and cargo. The Xalor launched from the hangar. The acceleration pressed Maya flat against his back. Wind that shouldn't exist in space roared around them, some effect of his protective field. They shot toward the krill fleet like a missile. Through their bond, Maya understood things she had never learned. She could feel the Xalor's battle instincts, honed over centuries. She could sense the krill ship's positions, without seeing them. Most importantly, she could feel his pain, the wounds on his spine screaming with every movement. But she also felt his determination. The lead krill ship fired first. Plasma bolts streaked toward them, bright against the darkness. In the old days, the Xalor would have dodged easily. Now, weakened and injured, he moved too slowly. Maya saw the trajectory in her mind. She didn't think she just sent the image through their bond. The Xalor rolled left, half a second before the plasma hit, trusting her vision completely. They dodged. More shots came. Maya's mind worked frantically, seeing patterns in the chaos. She had spent 5 years in silence, organizing her thoughts visually. Now those visual patterns showed her where the shots would go before they fired. She sent the images to the Xalor, and he moved. Left, dive, barrel roll, climb. They flowed together, moving as one. Where traditional war dragon bonds relied on shouted commands, Maya and the Xalor needed no words. Her thoughts became his movements instantly. They reached the first krill ship. The Xalor's claws tore through its hull like paper. His tail whipped around, smashing the ship's engines. It spun away, disabled. The krill fleet scattered, no longer confident. They had expected an easy raid. They hadn't expected a war dragon. But there were still 19 ships, and the Xalor was already tiring. Maya felt his strength fading through their bond. The wounds on his back reopened further. Blood, his real blood, mixed with the black fluid soaking into her clothes. A krill dreadnought, twice the size of the others, moved into position. Its main cannon charged. Energy building. But it wasn't aimed at them. It was aimed at the fleeing civilian ships. Maya's mind screamed, "Not them, not the children, not again." Through their bond, the Xalor felt her terror. He felt her memories of the colony ship. He felt every nightmare she had carried for 5 years. And in that moment, their pain merged completely. He roared and dove toward the dreadnought. Too fast. Too reckless. His injured body couldn't handle the strain. Maya felt his muscles tearing, his bones creaking under the stress. But he didn't slow down. They reached the dreadnought just as it fired. The Xalor twisted his body, spreading his wings wide. The plasma blast meant for the civilian ships hit him instead. The impact was devastating. The Xalor's protective field shattered. The blast tore through his left wing, ripping membrane and snapping bone. He screamed a sound that carried across the vacuum through pure telepathic force. Maya screamed with him, but they were close now. Close enough to strike. The Xalor crashed into the dreadnought's hull, claws digging deep. He tore at the ship's armor with desperate fury, opening it like a tin can. His tail smashed through the bridge. His teeth found the ship's reactor core. The dreadnought began breaking apart. They pushed away from the dying ship, but the Xalor's strength was gone. His wings barely moved. They tumbled through space, spinning out of control toward the station. Maya clung to his back, her hands slipping on his blood-slicked scales. She could feel him fading through their bond, his consciousness flickering. He had nothing left, but she did. For 5 years, Maya had been silent. For 5 years, she had locked everything inside, all her pain, all her grief, all her rage at the universe that took her family. She had buried it so deep that words themselves became impossible. Now, holding on to a dying dragon who had given everything to protect strangers, something inside her broke open. She screamed, not telepathically, not through their bond. She screamed aloud with her physical voice. the sound tearing from her throat after years of silence. All her pain, all her loss, all her defiance, poured out in that scream, and through their bond, the Xalar heard it. Felt it. Her human emotion, raw and fierce and unbreakable. His roar joined hers. The combined force of their voices, his telepathic, hers physical, both channeled through their bond, exploded outward in a wave. It wasn't telekinesis. It wasn't a weapon. It was pure will made manifest. Every krill ship within a kilometer had its systems overload. Sensors exploded. Navigation computers fried. Communication arrays burst into sparks. The ships didn't explode, they just went dark, drifting helplessly. The remaining krill vessels saw what happened and fled. They jumped to hyperspace without even bothering to retrieve their disabled ships. Maya and the Xalar tumbled toward Station Carvex's hangar, both barely conscious. They crashed through the atmospheric field and hit the hangar floor hard. Metal crumpled. Alarms blared. Emergency teams rushed forward. Maya rolled off the Xalar's back and landed on the floor beside him. Her whole body hurt. Blood covered her, most of it his, some of it hers. She tried to stand but collapsed. The Xalar's massive head turned toward her. His golden eyes found hers. Through their bond, fading but still there, she felt his gratitude, his respect, his affection for this strange little human who had refused to let him die alone. She reached out and touched his scales one more time. "We did it," she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken but real. "We saved them." Medical teams swarmed around them. Dr. Vexana shouted orders. Commander Vorath coordinated the response. But Maya barely heard any of it. She was so tired. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the Xalar's eye closing, his breathing steadying. He would survive. They both would. 3 weeks later, Maya sat in the medical bay beside Doc Xalar's recovery chamber. His wounds were finally healing properly. The bond marks on his scales, those soft blue spirals, glowed steadily now. She wrote in her notebook while he rested. "Everyone thinks being human means being the strongest or the toughest. But maybe it just means we're good at finding strength in broken things, including ourselves." Dr. Vexana approached quietly. "The Confederation wants to see you both. They're rewriting the War Dragon protocols because of what happened. You've proven bonds can form in ways no one imagined." Maya looked at the sleeping dragon. She still didn't talk much. Words came slowly, carefully, when she was ready. But she didn't need them for the Xalar. Their bond carried everything that mattered. Other war dragons whose warriors had died began arriving at the station, drawn by news of the impossible bond. Maya started working with them, teaching others what she had learned, that sometimes the greatest strength wasn't in standing tall. It was in sitting beside someone who had fallen and refusing to leave until they were ready to rise again. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.